As you know, if you've watched any of my trip videos, that I usually backpack solo, and that means I am able to get away with carrying a one-person shelter. However, recently, my nephew Bill and my great-nephew Dax have both expressed interest in possibly going along on some of my adventures. And that was just enough of an excuse for me to go shopping for a two-person shelter. Now, I did a thorough search, and ultimately I decided on getting the TarpTent Stratospire 2. I took that shelter on a recent trip to the Necklace Lakes and wanted to try it out there. And when I talked briefly in that video about some of my first impressions, and later on, one of my fellow gearhead viewers, Vanderfalk from Norway, has suggested that people might be interested in hearing about the entire thought process I went through and why I ended up deciding to go with the Stratospire. Hey guys, I'm Dan from ShastaBubba Adventures, and today I'm going to walk you through that process, explain why I discarded the ones that I did, and also tell you about the one shelter that I really wanted even more than a Stratospire and why I didn't get that one. Okay, 2 points that I really want to emphasize right from the start. First is all of the decisions that I made were based solely on the statistics from the websites, not on personal experience. I haven't set up or spent any time in these shelters that I discarded. Second is that my opinion is based solely on my personal likes and dislikes, and every one of these shelters that I discarded has been used and loved by literally thousands of people. So if you're one of those people that feel like your personal favorite has been unfairly maligned, please let us know that in the comments. Tell me what I was wrong about, and then we'll all benefit from that feedback. So the parameters that I was looking at was, first, I knew that this is a shelter that I will only use once, maybe twice a year, so I didn't want to spend a ton of money on it. And that meant no DCF. Right off the bat, that rules out anything from Z-Packs or HMG. And as much as I love HMG's packs, I think their shelters are just ridiculously overpriced, so that's not even an option. Second, I like to be comfy when I sleep, and that means long and wide pads, which means that the shelter had to be wide enough in the footprint for 2 wide pads side by sides, which means 50 inches wide. Third, it had to be side entry with 2 doors, just to make peace in camp. It doesn't work very well if you have to climb over your hiking partner to go pee in the middle of the night. So that's why I had to have 2 doors. Now, I'm not going to go into the prices and weights of everything that I talk about here because it would just be overwhelming, so I'll just mention those details for the top contenders. Also, I wanted to be completely open-minded, so I started out looking at all of the options, including freestanding tents from the big name brands. So I looked at the big Agnes copper spur, the MSR's redesigned Hubba Hubba, which is called the NX2, the Nemo Dagger 2, which seems to be very popular, and the REI Half Dome. Now, unfortunately, every one of those shelters comes in at 3.5 to 4 pounds, so for me, that's just way too heavy to even consider. And they cost as much or more than what you can get from an ultralight or small cottage company. So, and I don't really understand why people want to throw their money at these big corporations when they can support a small company and get something that's both lighter and better made, as well as quite often a cheaper tent. One exception to that I wanted to mention is the REI Half Dome, which at $279, plus if you can use your 20% discount from once a year, that would be a good option for car camping. Now, there's only one shelter from a big name company that I thought was even worth considering, and that's the big Agnes Tiger Wall, which at 35 ounces really is certainly in a reasonable weight range. However, unfortunately, it is a tapered shape, so it won't accommodate the 2 wide pads. So that brings us to considering a class of shelter called a hybrid. And remember, that is the 1.5 wall shelters that have basically a double wall on the side and a single wall on top. And first I'll mention REI's Flash Air 2, which, hey, kudos to REI for trying to be ultralight. And the Flash Air is wide enough at the head, but unfortunately it also is a tapered shape, so it won't work for the two square wide pads, rectangular wide pads. Then there's the two-person Swiftline from Yama Mountain Gear, which is unfortunately also tapered. So in the category of hybrid designs that are all big enough, there are the 6 Moon Designs Lunar Duo, the Lightheart Gear Duo, and the TarpTent Double Rainbow. And I have to say I was just really close to pulling the trigger on the Double Rainbow. It looked really good to me, but then I remembered some of my previous experience with hybrid construction and having condensation issues, and I really didn't want to mess with that with this situation. So ultimately, I added a fourth parameter, which is that I wanted only full double wall shelters. If a hybrid works for you, where you hike mostly, if you do most of your hiking in low humidity areas, maybe that design does work for you. And if so, you can get away with a pretty good price and weight with any of those last mentioned designs. So moving on to the ultralight designs that are full double wall shelters, there is the 6 Moon Designs Haven Bundle, which at $335 and 34 ounces for a true double wall is pretty awesome, but unfortunately it's only 45 inches wide, so it won't deal with the wide pads. But if you can get away with narrow pads, that would be a screaming deal. Then there's the MLD Dual Mid, which I do own and have used a lot, and unfortunately that just is nowhere near big enough, even though they claim that it's a two-person shelter. But what about the larger offerings from MLD? Well, there's the Dual Mid XL, which has a sleeping area of 48 inches, but unfortunately it's just one door and the pole is kind of in the way. But the biggest drawback is it's $365 for the shelter, just for the tarp, and $215 for the sill net tent, which means $580 for a sill nylon setup, which is just ridiculous. Now there is the Super Mid, which would no doubt work for two. The net tent is a massive 90 by 90 inches, so huge. But because it is so big and so tall, you need to bring an extra pole to hold up that tall shelter. Now the weight of the pair is 50 ounces, which isn't bad for that enormous size, but the price goes up too. So that's $680 for that, which, you know, that would make a great base camp if you were doing some fall backcountry hunting or something like that, but really is unreasonable for what I was looking for. I should mention that you can put the Dual Mid XL inside the Super Mid, and that would cut down a little bit on the weight and price, but you still have to deal with the one door and the pole issue. Which brings us to the TarpTent Stratospire 2. Now, that runs at $360, plus if you have them do the seam sealing, that's another $35, so $395, and the weight is 43 ounces. The Stratospire is a full double wall shelter, and that's a good weight for a two-person sill nylon tent. It has two doors, and most of all, the size is 52 inches wide, so big enough for my needs. It is a little expensive, but I was able to get mine used for $300 off of the gear swap on Backpacking Light. Remember, I always suggest that when you figure out the gear that you want, that you first look at the gear swaps, and you might be able to score something lightly used for a lot cheaper like I did. The downsides to the Stratospire are, I think it's a little finicky to put up. I'll confess to you that the first time I did put it up, it took me a half an hour, even though I had looked at the videos online about how to put it up. But it's just kind of weird to figure out. And I will mention one detail just as an aside, that the videos online say to do stake, stake, first pole, second pole, stake, stake. And I found it was a lot easier just to stake all 4 corners and then put up the poles. Maybe over time I'll figure out why that doesn't work, but for me that was way easier than trying to hold the second pole and put the 3rd stake in at the same time. That's kind of a big reach. But the biggest drawback for me of the Stratospire is the fixed struts, which mean that those, when it's all packed up, it's a 16-inch long package, and so it doesn't fit inside the tent very well. So you either have to put it on the side pocket or, like I do, tie it on top. Now that's not a deal breaker, but it is kind of a hassle. It's a lot easier for me with my 1-person tent to store it inside the pack versus having to deal with it on top of the pack. So what was the tent that I wanted to get but didn't? That would be the Freestanding Gear XMid2. Now that XMid2 is lighter, quite a bit lighter than the Stratospire. It's actually 36 ounces. It's cheaper. It starts at $300, brand new. And it looks to me like it would be easier to set up. So why didn't I get one? Well, unfortunately, you can't get them. They only come out in batches, and they're sold out as quickly as the batch comes out. Dan Durston is a gear designer with a day job. He is a fisheries biologist in British Columbia. And I personally have had the pleasure of meeting Dan and spending a couple of hours with him, so I can tell you he's a good guy, and he is obsessive about details, which is something that you really want in a gear designer. Unfortunately, because he has a day job, he contracts out construction of his gear, and that leads inevitably to delays. And so I believe that over time, those kinks will get ironed out and his gear will be more available more frequently. But for now, I'm really happy with my TarpTent Stratospire 2, but I do have to confess that if an XMid2 becomes available, I might have to cash in some comic books or something like that and grab one of those. Okay, everybody, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.